Welcome to Man Up. Today our guest will be Dr. Richard Cox.
Man Up is a series that challenges men to become strong, unique, discipled followers of Jesus. Troy Ferguson, Sean Tice, Victor Thomas, and today's guest host is Richard Cox. Welcome to Man Up.
I've shared my story on the show before about how I didn't have a dad growing up, and it was a struggle for a long time in my life, and I never really met my dad. To get to really know him very well, and I met him probably about 6 times, about half a dozen times, and we just had short little meetings, at a wedding, different things like that. And so didn't really know him. And then I knew God wanted me to start a ministry to reach fatherless kids, single moms, grandparents raising grandkids. And so I started this ministry in 2008 and just started plowing forward. And we did it on the side for a long time. And then in 2019, we went full time. And my dad found out that we were going full time with it. He found out that we had started traveling the country and speaking about fatherlessness and all these things were happening. We were in 80 plus churches that year doing all this stuff. And he had told 2 different people, my uncle and another family member, he told them, he said, Sean's making this whole ministry off of me being a lousy father, off of him being a lousy father. And he started telling people that. That's the 2 people that I know of that he told. And I started thinking about that. And I wasn't sure what to say to him because I only saw him 6 times. And so I was in Las Vegas where he lived, where he lived when I grew up, but also where he lived the rest of his life. And I heard that he was really sick and he was struggling. His wife had just passed away. He had been married like 7 times. He had 7 or 8 wives, something like that. And he was sick in bed, and I was out in Las Vegas for ministry and at a missions conference, I was doing different ministry at different churches. And I knew I needed to go see him. And so I went down and saw him, went to this house he was staying at, and he looked horrible. He barely could get out of bed. He was just really struggling. And I went and saw him, and one of the things I wanted to talk to him about was the fact that God used what he did for good. And God had been working on my heart about the story of Joseph, how he told his brothers in the Bible, you meant it for evil, but God used it for good. And so I was able to go talk to my dad. We didn't really have anything much in common besides the Steelers. So we talked about the Steelers a little bit, and he talked about how he loved the Steelers, and that was his big thing, and he had all these different decorations in the bedroom he was staying at, this house. And we had some common ground there, talked about it for a few minutes, and then I wanted to tell him, I said, hey, I just want you to know, I heard what you had said about our ministry and how I was making this ministry off of you being a lousy father. And so I was able to confront him about that, not in a mean way, just wanted him to know. I wanted really him to have peace about it too. I said, I don't want you to look at it like that. I said, I want you to understand that maybe you meant it for evil, but God used it for good. And honestly, I remember seeing him that day and thinking, he was kind of set free. And I want to encourage you with these words. If somebody's been evil against you, they've meant something for evil, they've caused harm in your life, see how God can use it for good. How can God use that testimony now for you to do good, for you to help other people, for you to share your testimony with others, to encourage them on their journey? There's so many of us that are hurting, we're struggling with different things in life. But if we share our story to help others, to show them that, hey, we've overcome something, it can help them as well, and they can overcome it, and you can be a testimony, and that's what God wants us to do. So I encourage you to let your story be used for good. Stick around and come back for our guest for today.
Impact Productions, a multi-layer technology company providing on-site, online, and in-studio video services. Contact Impact Productions to capture your story.
Welcome back to Man Up. We're excited to have our guest today, Dr. Richard Cox. Richard, would you take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm the pastor of Overflow Church here in Altoona. I'm married to Tanya. My wife's a nurse practitioner at Station Medical in the endocrinology department. And I have 3 kids here in the Altoona School District. Caleb's at the high school, Allison is at the junior high, and Kristen is at Logan Elementary.
It's a unique call to become a pastor. Would you tell us about your call?
So I'm a 4th generation missionary in the Wesleyan Church. My great-grandparents were missionaries in the Caribbean, and my grandparents were missionaries in the Caribbean and in South America, and aunts and uncles that were missionaries. And at a young age, about 5, I started sensing God was calling me to be a missionary. But as a family that's serving all over the world, I'd naturally assume that if God was calling me to be a missionary, I would be serving in some remote village in Africa. And I had a passion for Africa, and my dad transitioned from being a pastor to missionaries in Africa right before I turned 16. And I loved it. Africa, in my opinion, is a magical place. I was ready to spend my entire life there. But while I was in Africa, I started sensing that God was calling me to be a missionary in North America, which is something that I didn't understand. Because in my mind, I viewed America as a prodigal nation, a nation that had heard the gospel but had rejected it. And so it turned into about 6 years of wrestling with God, telling God, you either call me to be a pastor or you call me to be a missionary, but you can't call me to be both. Because if you call me to be a missionary, I'm going to go to Africa or Asia or somewhere else. So I went to the Bible college in Africa for 2 years, transitioned back to Canada to go to Kingswood University to finish up my global ministry degree. And I was like, maybe God just doesn't want me in Africa. Let's go try out Central Asia. So I was in Central Asia for 5 months doing an internship with school, working in a predominantly Muslim country, and couldn't. I loved every minute of it. It was a great experience, but couldn't get away from the fact that God was calling me to be a missionary in North America. And this was back before FaceTime. And I was talking to my mom one night, and I was complaining. I was like, I wish God would just give me a Post-it note telling me what I'm supposed to do. And she said, maybe he already has. And in that moment, my wrestle with God stopped, and I took an outreach pastor position in Clearfield that was supposed to be 2 years. I was going to do a residency, then go overseas. I really thought God was going to get it out, get pastoring out of the system, and then I could go be a missionary. But while I was in Clearfield, God started opening my eyes to the number of people that were driving past our church buildings, knew Jesus' name as a swear word, but didn't understand the gospel. And so that really began to change my whole paradigm as I began to understand ministry in the North American context, primarily from the lens of a missionary rather than a pastor.
So Richard, you mentioned Clearfield. What brought you to this area? Ultimately, Altoona. You're in Altoona now. Well, what brought you to Central Pennsylvania?
So I was in Clearfield for 5.5 years as their outreach pastor. It was a healthy, vibrant church that was reaching lost people, and I kind of started sensing I was working myself out of a job. They didn't need me. Around that same time, I discovered in the 2000 census that in Central Pennsylvania, 290,000 people claimed no affiliation with the church. And God started breaking my heart for those people in our region that claimed no affiliation with the church, no relationship with Jesus. And that's when we started sensing God calling us to start a church that would make changing that number the priority. And as we moved to Altoona, I knew that if we were going to see that number change, we couldn't focus on just being the biggest church in town. Because being the biggest church in town isn't going to put a dent on the 290,000. And so if we're going to reach the 290,000, we had to raise up missionaries and make disciples and send them out to reach people growing up outside the church, and to let God lead and let God move. But rather than trying to figure out how many people we could get to gather in one space, let's work with the established churches that want to reach lost people, and let's raise up pastors within our church and missionaries and send them out to reach those in our region. And so that's been our heartbeat from day one, is what does it look like to run after that number, and one day in the census report finding out that that number significantly changed in our region.
Richard, I heard you're improving. You're going for your doctorate. Is that what's the focus?
Yep.
What's the focus of your doctorate?
So the focus was on raising up church planters in the local church. So when we moved to Altoona, I knew that God was calling us to change the 290,000, and I knew that we'd work with the established churches, but we'd also help start new churches that were reaching people. We were ready to plant new churches within that first year. I interviewed more than a dozen church planter, great candidates. Some of them have gone on to plant in other contexts, and through that journey, God just kept closing one door after another, and I was really discouraged. And I'd gone to a pastor's gathering that our denomination was hosting, and our missionary director for the denomination, was raising money to get pastors ordained in the global church because they were being raised up in the harvest. And in that moment, God convicted me that I was looking for church planters in the wrong place, that I was looking at seminaries, I was looking at youth pastors in other churches trying to figure out, hey, you come, now we'll send. And God really convicted me that our church planters were actually in our church, and that it was our job not to go recruit someone that another church had developed, but actually start raising up church planters from within. And so my doctoral dissertation was focused on identifying churches across the country, about a dozen churches that I focused on that were raising up church planters from within their local church and sending them out to start churches. So.
Yeah, ministry has a lot of wonderful times, but there's also challenges.
Yeah.
Would you share some of the successes you've had, also some of the challenges as well?
I think the successes we've had is just those that have been called into ministry. Renew Church here in town was started by Matt Burns, who got saved at our church and expressed a call to ministry. He started a backyard club, and now it's a thriving church in town. And so that is exciting, and just seeing God move and work in fresh ways within that congregation. And I think that's just one of many more that will be coming. I think the heartaches is when you're running after people that don't know Jesus, and they're coming to that place of discovering who Jesus is, but they choose to run after the way of the world instead of experiencing all that God has. And there's nothing more discouraging than when you're walking with people that don't know Jesus and then watch them embrace the world rather than follow Jesus. When somebody comes to me and tells me they're going to another church in town, I feel like I passed the baton. It's that church's responsibility. I don't lose sleep over that. But it's incredibly difficult when you're walking with people that are just discovering who Jesus is, but yet turn their back on him and lose the blessing.
How do you personally handle that, though? Like, I mean, I know we've said, oh, we just, but as in the ministry, it's hard to just let go, right? So how do you handle that?
Well, I've discovered that I have to be more open and having key people that I trust that I can talk through some of that stuff, because bottling things up just doesn't work. I'm a verbal processor, and so I need to be able to talk that out and just process that, and that's been a big help for me.
Yeah.
You know, you guys may or may not know this. So we've talked multiple times on this show about the Blair County Pastors Network. And this is the collection of multiple pastors and leaders who get together and pray regularly and do a variety of events, Saturate, Altoona, and so forth. Well, Richard was one of the initial facilitators way back, I don't know, was it 9 years ago, 9 years ago, to get a couple pastors together for prayer. Richard and Derek Hallman were the two guys that kind of, and this is young men who aren't from here, let's just see what we can do with this, you know. And I will say this, because Richard won't say this about himself. It took someone humble like Richard to lead an effort such as that, because most times when pastors get together, egos become a problem. Well, who's in charge? I'm the one that started this. But I believe one of the reasons this works so successfully in our area is because a humble man, a truly humble man, really kind of helped launch this thing, and it's still operating that humility. So Richard, for that, I just want to tell you thank you for what you've, and he's still very much a core part of some of that's going on. But I believe one of the reasons it's been such a vibrant success is because the humility. You know, we all check our egos at the door. That's every Sunday we get together and pray. Nobody's there pushing one denomination or theology over another. So I just want to say I appreciate Richard. And when we come back in our second segment, Richard's going to talk about some of the other things in the realm of community. But Richard, what was your reasoning way back then to try to get pastors together? If you could just share a little bit about that.
Again, for me, it goes back to the 290,000. We can't do it alone. The only way that we can do it is if we lock arms. And I'm convinced that the majority of Christians really desire to reach those outside the church, but a lot of times we don't know how. And we've stopped engaging our country like missionaries and are thinking more like institutions. And so my heart from day one has been, let's bring people together and do what we can to help mobilize. I'm always looking for ways to help churches engage community. I can still remember when I was in Clearfield, one of the guys in our church, we were doing a trunk or treat, and he came to us and he was all upset that the church across town started doing a trunk or treat. I was like, wait a second, no, like that's a good thing. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
We want every single church doing outreach, and if we're the ones that lead the way and start it, who cares? Let's continue to open it up and help each other be more effective, and that's why we do so much outreach with other churches, because when one church wins, we all win, and when we get that mentality, I really believe we'll have a far more significant impact. We're doing too much running after the same group of people rather than actually penetrating darkness.
We need to take a break. Richard, would you stick around with us for the next segment?
Okay.
We'll be right back.
This segment is brought to you by Harry's Construction, whose motto is, "If you can dream it, we can create it." They are the kitchen and bath design experts, so call Harry's Construction for all your remodeling needs.
Welcome back to Man Up. Richard, would you tell us a little bit about the recent venture of Saturate 814?
So several years ago, someone asked me the question, what would I do differently if I believed God was going to finish the Great Commission in our lifetime? I spent a lot of time thinking about that question. And every time I try to answer that question, I always come to the same conclusion, that I would devote all of my time to making disciples who make disciples and mobilizing them to be missionaries in the places that God is calling them. As I think about what it looks like for the church to reach the 290,000 people in our region that have no relationship with Jesus, I firmly believe that we're never going to reach them by having more or better pastors on the stage. We've got phenomenal pastors in our region, but that's not penetrating the darkness. If we want to penetrate the darkness, we have to mobilize everyday followers of Jesus to live out their faith where they live, work, and play. And as a local church, I'm doing that with our local church, and I've looked around the city and I realized that there's several churches in town that are really good at mobilizing the people in their church. And then there's some of the pastors are more gifted in shepherding, which is an important gift, but maybe aren't as good at mobilizing everyday missionaries in their church. And so 3 years ago, I kind of looked around our city and said, hey, let's bring a group of, at that time there were about 6 or 8 of us that came together and said, let's start doing some training events using those in the city that have the gift of mobilization and open it up to everyone so that all the churches in the city and all the churches in the region benefit. And that's been growing each year. This past year, in November, we had a training event called Saturate 814 with Joel Repick during our main sessions. We had more than 28 breakout sessions that were mobilizing people to reach the lost in the places God was calling them. So everything from serving in the foster care system to neighborhood ministry, marketplace ministry, discipleship, evangelism, equipping people to reach people in their sphere of influence in the ways that God is calling them.
So you had 28 breakouts. Is this, how long of a training is this?
So it was a 2-day training event on Friday and Saturday. Each day there were 2 main sessions with Joel Repick, and then throughout the 2 days there were 6 breakout sessions, and during each breakout session you could choose from either 4 or 5 breakouts that were specifically focused on the thing that God was calling you to minister in.
And were the people that were doing the training in the different breakouts, were they local, or did you bring them in from outside?
All of them were local here in our region.
You're one of them.
Yeah, that's one fatherlessness. So cool. Local people.
Local people.
Yep, lots of local pastors and ministry leaders. Carrie Biddle from Child Evangelism Fellowship did one on reaching children. Kevin DeLapp with Backyard Ministries did some on neighborhood ministry. Jonathan Weibel from Center County did 2 breakout sessions on front yard missions. Center County churches are doing some phenomenal work just equipping their people to reach their neighbors. If people could just get back to the basics of just love the people that live on the street next to you, we could have significant impact. So lots of local people like that leading breakouts.
Awesome.
So the training was for pastors as well as people who felt like they may have a calling?
So I told people that the training was geared for lay people with pastors welcome.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that we've got to shift the paradigm in the church. People might not agree with me, but I really do not believe it's our job to get people to church. It's our job to get people to Jesus. And we've mixed those two up, and we've got to get back to the place where we see our job as getting people to Jesus. Because what I've found is if you invite someone to church that doesn't know Jesus, you got to keep figuring out how you up your game to keep them coming back. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, when you start a Bible study at work and you walk with someone in discipleship and they get to the point where they make a profession of faith because they believe Jesus is who he says he is, you don't have to invite them to church. Mm-hmm. Because they're like, where are the other Christians? I want to come hang out with Christians. And if we could just get back to leading people to Jesus and get back to the place where we realize there's only one church in the city, there's only one church in the region, and we have this mentality in the church that if I'm the one that leads them to Christ, mm-hmm. then they belong to our church. But the fact of the matter is, I think the last statistic I said, or Saul said, that it takes 27 gospel conversations before someone becomes a follower of Jesus. So that means that likely there were 10 other churches involved in having gospel conversations before that person came to know Christ. And if we could understand that our goal is to get people to Jesus, and Jesus draws them to the church, and as long as they're in a church in our community, we should be celebrating that.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
That's why at Overflow we continue to celebrate baptisms that we played a part in that happened in other churches, because someone in our church had a gospel conversation with them. Now
Sure.
they weren't the last person in the link, but they were in the link, and they made an impact in that person's life, and we get to celebrate it, and it's all one team effort. Reaching those outside the church.
I like that. When we were off here, I wanted to revisit something you had said about a church opening in Juniata and a church that had previously been there. Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so our church was recently gifted the Juniata United Presbyterian Church for the purpose of starting a new church there. I'm a firm believer that churches are just like people. Mm-hmm. We have life cycles, and I've never been to a funeral where they berated the person for having cancer the third time and not able to beat it. Now, you go to a funeral and you celebrate the life of that individual, and sometimes, while I never want to see a church close, sometimes the church does get to the end of its life cycle. The Juniata Presbyterian Church was down to 3 members, an elderly church, but they had 140 years of significant impact in that neighborhood of telling people about Jesus. The pictures we found in that building packed out with people that were coming, following Jesus. And they've given us the building. We're partnered with about 6 other churches here in central Pennsylvania that are going to partner with us over the next 2 years. We're just going to love that neighborhood well, and slowly start going different outreach, start alphas, start community engagement, and allow a new church to be birthed there. We'll send people from our church, Renew's sending people. We're partnering with John Goddessart at the Well, Pastor Tim, and some pastors in the region, Chris Garrison out in the Cove, but just partnering together so that we can help start new communities of faith that are proclaiming the message of Jesus in these neighborhoods that used to have a much stronger church presence than they do now.
Yeah, a lot of vacant churches in the area. A lot of.
What would you say to somebody that says there's too many churches? Because there's some people think that, there's one in this corner, one in that corner. Like, what would you say to them?
Well, when I did the math a couple years ago, based on the average attendance of churches across the country and the number of churches in Altoona, that means on any given Sunday there's less than 10% of people in church. And so, we do have a decent number of churches that you can see the churches, but we're definitely not saturated. And the vast majority of people in our community are not actively connected to a church. I mean, just think about it. If every single church in our city were to double its attendance in the next year, I mean, we would be writing books, we would be on national news for revival breaking out in our city. And 80% of people would still not be in church on any given Sunday.
Wow.
And so when you actually start looking at the numbers, it opens the door of like, oh my goodness, like we've got a big job. And it is an overwhelming job if anybody does it by themselves. But if we'll lock arms and we'll do this together and we'll lay down the territorialism that we've got, that these are my people, instead of saying, no, these are God's people. Yeah. And if God's going to call them to reach people, and like, I mean, as someone that's continually released people to go plant churches, it's the hardest thing we ever did. During COVID, we released 40% of our leaders to go and start 3 new churches, and it about killed our church because COVID was hard, but it was the right thing to do, and because of that, Renew had 60 baptisms last year. That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't said no. Like, we're more concerned about people meeting Jesus than figuring out how many people we can get in the doors of our building.
Yeah, that's good.
When I was in Bible college, one professor told us, because there's so many different churches around, he said different people have different temperaments, different things that they preferences, right? And that's why you have different types of churches. Different, one on this corner, one on this corner. They might be more contemporary or something like that. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks again for joining us for Man Up. We'll see you again next week.
Made by Vogel is a father and son business that produces high-quality handmade wooden products such as cutting boards, bowls, bottle stoppers, and more. Products for sale can be found on their Etsy site or in downtown Altoona at the Clay Cup. You can't go wrong buying from Made by Vogel.
Next time on Man Up, we're going to talk about Christmas and have local star from The Voice, Ethan Eckenrode.
Like I said, it wasn't something I wanted to do, and there was still a part of me, even once I got further in the process of being on the show, is like, is this really something I want? I don't know, I just felt God's call in my life to be like, it's not what you thought you wanted, but this is still good, and you can still, show who I am, show who God is through this experience. So, yeah.
All that and more next time on Man Up.
Champion Roofing, we're the solution. You can count on the roofing pros. Our roots run deep and our integrity shows. Proud to serve you, we love what we do. With Champion's unbeatable warranties too.